Hello everybody and welcome back, or welcome for the first time if you're here and not a regular, where today we're going to be taking a look at F1 25 and its virtual reality port on PSVR. Now this is exclusive to that platform, this isn't on Quest or PSVR2, but I am using a PSVR2 plugged into a PC with the adapter to play it. We're going to be going over a little bit about the game itself, but mostly about the virtual reality port and the quality of it, and unfortunately, as the title suggests, it's a different year but the same story as the last couple of ports. Before we get into it, only 25% you are subscribed to, please feel free to do so if you like PSVR2 or VR in general, and thank you to our patrons and members who keep the channel going day after day and week after week. With that being said, let's talk F1 25 VR. As I said, I played this on PSVR2 at 67% resolution, as I'm running a 6700 XT and 16 gigs of RAM, which is usually enough to run say Blade and Sorcery, Half-Life Alyx, both modded and unmodded, and they run completely fine, I have no problems. However, I do lower that resolution just to make sure I can hit 90Hz in the headset. That being said, 67% resolution does look pretty good in most cases, but as we'll get into, F1 25, not so much. Before we talk about the VR port though, a couple notes about the game itself. So far, the handling feels leaps and bounds better than last year. The new scan tracks like Suzuka feel and look a lot better to race around. Traction control on lower speed corners and low speed corners in general just feel much better to handle this year, and dirty air feels a lot better in terms of how realistic it should feel with understeer when you're trailing cars about a second in front of you. Those are my main notes from my first few hours of playing the game and what I noticed the most. No matter if you're in VR or non-VR, the game still does retain last year's bug and the year before that's bug, where if you have a wheel plugged in, for me it's the Thrustmaster T3000 RS, and you have manual gears selected and traction control lower than full, sometimes you'll just have no force feedback at all and you'll have to pause the game and unpause it to fix it. This isn't too bad in single player because the game freezes for you, but in multiplayer it is quite damaging because the game still runs obviously. Overall though, game feels better than last year, but I still am early days with it. As a VR port though, things get a little bit worse here. Visually, the game looks okay. It still has that TAA blur and shimmer to it, especially when passing objects very quickly, as you know, F1 cars tend to do, and no matter what I adjusted on Steam VR, in terms of resolution settings, it just didn't really change anything. The game just looks quite muddy at medium to longer distances. Close up, the modeling does look pretty great in the cars and it does feel quite immersive to sit in them, and that novelty honestly carries the game for me. Being able to race around Monaco in a car that is accurate and close up looks pretty good is a feeling like no other, but unfortunately, once you get past that say 20 meter or so mark in front of you, it just becomes a bit of a temporal anti-aliasing mess.
I was sat there on the first day of free practice. It's cool to see it in VR, like the novelty is still very much there. And then I was sat there for the race.
Visual effects are kept here though, like pieces of wings flying off, dirt on tyres if you run off into the grass and gravel being sprayed up into the air, which are much appreciated, and your body is fully modelled no matter what driver you are, and reacts like the flat screen game to being hit, for example by raising your hand up in the air, which is appreciated for immersion purposes. I did find though, visually, there are a couple issues that didn't pop up for me in 24 or 23. For example, the exposure is just incredibly bright in the garage when you're waiting for a race to start in the day, to the point where I couldn't really see much outside because it was so bright. And floodlights at night are no longer broken like they were last year, where they were completely disconnected from the light by about 10 meters, but they do have a large sheen over them, as if you had an actual windscreen in front of you in your Formula car, which obviously you don't. Really not quite sure what's happened though with that. Wet tarmac also does look a bit too shiny for me. Both on high and low settings, it is just a bit too bright, and does make it a little bit hard to position yourself on the track. That being said, the actual visual presets of lowest, low, medium, high, and ultra honestly didn't seem to make too much of a difference other than make my performance even worse than it was, which we'll get onto in a second. There were marginal improvements with shadows that I could see, but due to the resolution that I just couldn't seem to alter, I honestly didn't get too much out of this visually between each preset. It might be that if you have a 5090 or really beefy rig, the game could look amazing, but on a mid-spec rig like mine, you're not really going to have too much luck. The game isn't very well optimized and doesn't look great in terms of resolution, even though the assets and the scans of the tracks are pretty great. One thing that I do appreciate though is immersion is kept pretty much fully if you want it to be. When you're sat in the car, you have no HUD around you. You can pull up your MFD by pressing the B button for me on my T3000 RS, which brings up your MFD so you can actually go through and select, say if you want to change tyres or ring replacement or a weather update, but if you cycle through that you can get rid of it completely again, meaning you have to just rely on the telemetry from your wheel to keep you in the loop about what's happening, and I really appreciate that. That being said, Visually as a whole, it's the same as last year, it's a bit of a mess. Finally, let's talk performance here. As I said, I can run most of the VR games completely fine. I don't really have any problems. The only thing that I really struggle with nowadays are some Unreal Engine VR games where you inject with a mod into Unreal games and you can play them in virtual reality. For example, Still Wakes the Deep is one that I played a little while ago, and to be honest, that's what I'd equate this experience to. Very strange frame pacing and inconsistent performance. Although I'd say, to be honest, the UEVR mod of Still Wakes the Deep ran better than this game does, so that's a bit rough. In terms of pure stats on how it runs, I did do a couple of benchmarks, but the benchmark tool seemed to be broken. At lowest, it actually runs okay. There are some stutters, especially when using the flashback feature for some reason in single player, but on low, lowest or medium, it was playable, I'd say. It's not perfect at all. I'd say in medium, we're hitting about 60, maybe 75 on low and 80 on lowest. But on the benchmark, it was saying 44 FPS for all of these tests, so that was just blatantly wrong. Not sure what's going on there. However, going up to high or ultra, we're looking at, honestly, lows of about 40 to 25 FPS in some cases, especially in the wet, which is really rough. But I'm not expecting to be able to run that on my rig anyway. I was aiming for maybe medium, but honestly I settled for lowest because the visual difference wasn't even that big, and I got a lot of performance out of it comparatively. The main issue though is one that's kept from the last couple of games, and that is that there's just jitter whenever you move. If you move your head left or right, back or forwards, it feels like your tracking is broken even though it's not. You back out into the menu and your tracking is completely fine again. You can move around in 360 degrees, all dimensions, and you're fine. But once you get in the car, it just becomes a jittery mess. It's as if the headset doesn't know what it's doing with itself, but this isn't exclusive to PSVR2. I tried it with the DPVR4 as well, and it's just the same result.
Yeah, it's not fantastic. It's quite stuttery, especially when turning your head. And it feels like the tracking isn't right, even though when I go off back into the main menu, the tracking's perfectly fine. It's really weird.
And it's been like this for, I want to say, 2 years, since 23. It's clear that the game has kind of been copy-pasted in terms of its VR implementation from last year directly into here, with not too much work done to it. And while this is functional, it could have been so much more. Still though, I would probably pick this up on PS5 if it got an official PSVR2 port, and with dynamic foveated rendering, maybe that could unlock some more performance. But as it stands on PCVR, it's the same story as last year and the year before that and the year before that. F125's VR implementation is a bit of a mess, and the novelty of being in these fully scanned cars and tracks can only take it so far before the issues start to rear their ugly head. Anyway, have you tried F125 in VR? Let me know what you think of it. These are just my impressions after all. I'd love to see how it runs on a very beefy rig. I imagine much better. But on a mid to low spec rig, it's going to be a bit of a rough experience for you, but certainly playable if you're willing to make some compromises. It just doesn't look that great and doesn't feel that great due to the intense jittering whenever you move. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.